it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about signed books. But before we do, I have two things. One is a request from you to please subscribe and follow our YouTube channel. Not only can you get amazing content like this every Friday, but you can also learn about our latest author talks and programming at the Scholar. It's all free, and it's a great way to follow what we're doing. Midtown Scholar Bookstore on YouTube. And secondly, I have an update on last week's buy day. That's right. We were live from New York. And you remember what we talked about? We talked about triple deckers. Actually, we're live from DC, weren't we? Washington, DC. Talked about triple deckers, and this amazing triple decker came in this past week. I want to give a shout out to Phil at our warehouse, who identified this triple decker and brought it in. And just to give you a little sense of it, it is Wilkie Collins, who was a 19th century British novelist. There it is in three volumes. It's called No Name. Now, zoom in here, Amanda, and you'll see that what's interesting about this book is that it has the old label tag on it. Something's been removed, right, from the front of these books, and we're not entirely sure what it is. But I figured it out this week because another book came into the Scholar. It was a novel about Australia, which isn't in and of itself remarkable, but look what it had on the top. It had a yellow label from Moody's Lending Library. Yes, that's right, the very same Moody's we talked about last week, which was the big proponent of the triple-decker and ordered all these triple-deckers. So clearly at one point, somebody removed the Moody's Library label after that. And actually, it was pretty common. Once the book had run its course for that first year at Moody's Lending Library, they would then sell it off and replace the shelf space with other books. And so it's actually pretty hard to find a triple decker that isn't what we call in the book trade ex-library, because so many of them, 500 at least, came out of Moody's, and there were probably only fewer than 1,000 that were published. And remember from last week, you had to be pretty wealthy to actually buy the actual triple decker. So that is a Moody's Lending Library label. It tells you about your 1 guinea per annum subscription rate. It has the addresses, and there were many Moody's. This actually came from London. So that was a neat find to come in. All right, today we're going to talk about signed books. And I wanted to start with a little bit of tribute, both in honor of President's Day and in honor of the fact that Jimmy Carter has entered hospice care. And if you come over here, Amanda, you can see a display of books that were signed by Jimmy Carter, all of which recently came into the Scholar. We were contacted by a book scout. Yes, there are still book scouts today who used to follow Jimmy Carter from sort of book signing to book signing and get his signature on various things. And he traded me all these Jimmy Carter books for a Stephen Hawking book. Long story, but we do bartering sometimes here at the Scholar. And this is a lot of fun. Now, do you know who our most published president in American history is? Would you care to guess, Amanda? Jimmy Carter would be a good guess if you want to just go with that.
I'm going to say Reagan.
Well, it's not Reagan. It's actually Teddy Roosevelt. But Jimmy Carter is second. Jimmy Carter published over 30 books, and they were all after he was president, which is a pretty remarkable legacy for the last 40 or so years. One thing that we're going to talk about as we talk about signed books is how can you authenticate or really identify that a book is signed? And even if you look at Jimmy Carter here, I think it's interesting because his signature is not always the same. Here he's signing Jimmy Carter. There he's signing J. Carter. That's with his wife's signature. Here's another J. Carter that looks sort of similar. Here's a J. Carter in which the J and the C come together. So you can't really be an amateur, autograph enthusiast and be able to entirely tell. One way that they do it today is that they have this thing called Beckett, which is for autograph seekers. It's like a certification or an authenticity. And if you scan on the QR code, it takes you to like a certificate that says that this book was signed. You have to pay for that service. And it only really works for modern authors. I can't do it for 19th century authors, Amanda. Beckett will not determine Theodore Roosevelt necessarily, but we'll do Jimmy Carter. The best way to tell if your autograph is real, I'm going to give you some other examples here, is to look at it very closely under magnification, make sure it flows right, see if you know anything about where it was obtained or how it was obtained or who obtained it. All these were obtained by the same gentleman. I have pictures of him going from show to show. So pretty interesting stuff. Jimmy Carter, perhaps our most accomplished ex-president in American history, certainly has a claim to fame. All right. we're going to talk a little bit about a couple 19th century presidential wannabes, also in honor of President's Day. I love presidential wannabes because those signatures can be a lot harder to determine if they're real. And so I picked the Great Triumvirate, which was Webster, Clay, and Calhoun. Now, all three of these men wanted to be president of the United States, and none of them became president of the United States. But we happen to have signed books of each, and they contrast a little bit. And let me show those to you now. The Daniel Webster book that we have in the room, I know is a real signature because it is from his collected works, and he signed a series of them. Here is the title page for the Webster, the works of Daniel Webster from 1851 in Boston. And this is what's called the author's edition, or the subscriber's copy. And there is a copy of the Daniel Webster signature. So we can be pretty sure that that really is Daniel Webster. They issued a certain number. Daniel Webster's signature is not that uncommon or that valuable, really. It's not that much more valuable, or it's about the same as Jimmy Carter, which is also a pretty common signature today. But at least we're sure that that's real. Henry Clay, the second member of the Great Triumvirate, much more difficult. Henry Clay, this is a really interesting book that came out of this room here. This is an old Latin textbook. Well, it's a textbook about the elements of astronomy. It uses some Latin terminology. And Henry Clay signs it as a school child with his name Henricum Clay. And then he scratches out Clay and he puts in the Latin word for clay. So he would have signed that as a school student studying astronomy. And so there's no other copies of a signature of Henry Clay, with his Latinate name anywhere in the world. And that's a really fun one. And the final member of the Great Triumvirate, who is John C. Calhoun, this book came from Second Story last week in D.C. And their catalog had thought that it was by John E. Calhoun. And of course, John E. Calhoun didn't have any real value. And when you open it up, you can sort of guess why they said it was by John E. Calhoun instead of John C. Calhoun. But that is actually a C, and it is by John C. Calhoun. And the reason we know it is the John C. Calhoun, and the 1844 date works for it, is because it's also countersigned here at the bottom as Patrick Calhoun from his mother. And Patrick Calhoun is John C. Calhoun's grandson, and he grew up on John C. Calhoun's estate in the South and is known to have taught himself to read in his grandfather's library. So it's a nice connection, intergenerational connection between John C. Calhoun and Patrick Calhoun. The book itself, problematic because Patrick Calhoun, among other things, was a great scoundrel. He was most famous for bribing politicians in Maryland and the West Coast and all sorts of things. He also had chromium mines. So remember the poison books with the chromium yellow? Well, that all came out of Patrick Calhoun's mines when he wasn't bribing them to put up trolley lines and other types of things. We're going to go back here and end with the signed books with just a couple modern ones that I think are interesting because they teach you a little bit about how to determine a facsimile signature. So Robert Jordan, author of the most famous fantasy series, sort of post Lord of the Rings and maybe pre-Harry Potter, he had a whole series, but he died before it was complete. And this, I believe, was the last book that he published in his Wheel of Time series before he passed away. So time-wise, you know that the signature is good. And one way that you can tell the signature is real is that he's sort of gone over top of the lettering that's in print. Whereas in the next book that was published, which is published posthumously after his death, you can see a Robert Jordan signature, but that's because they printed it. It is an actual printed signature. And if you take a magnifying glass, Amanda, and you lift it up and see if you can zoom through, it may not work great here for by day, but the point is, if you look at that signature, it turns very quickly into dots. And it becomes clear that it's sort of a dot matrix type of printing, and it's clearly a facsimile. What makes this one more interesting is that the co-author, Brandon Sanderson, who took over the series, that's his real signature at the bottom with a fake Robert Jordan signature on top. And Sanderson, insisted that Jordan's signature go in it as well because he wasn't going to sign books that didn't have his mentor's signature in it as well. So those are all examples of signed books, some old, some modern. And we're going to end today on a funny book that just came in. And people were a little disappointed, Amanda, when I was unable to come up with a good Valentine's Day book. You know, I did do Crap Taxidermy as my funny book on Valentine's Day, and it's hard to find a funny book that would have worked for Valentine's Day, but I found it this past week thanks to our neighbors at Radish and Rye, Dusty, who brought over a whole bunch of agricultural books this past week. I was zooming through them. I found this wonderful book by the Quaker's Oats Company from the 1950s, and I wish I'd had it 2 weeks ago, but I'm going to share it with you now. It is How to Succeed with Chicks. And it really is a book about chickens and how to feed them, how to care for them, how to raise them. No sense of irony, but a wonderful book for Valentine's Day. That's going in the all-star case at Midtown Scholar. All right, well, thanks for watching. I hope you'll watch next Friday and every Friday for more adventures in the book trade. It's been a great pleasure. See you next time.